I think we have all of the components to really do this. I think that Kellie embodies the essence of progressive democracy. I think that her lived experience offers a metaphor for everything that is needed without having to be professorial and abstract and theoretical. She has lived everything that we need. And I know enough about framing and about the linguistics and the cognitive science piece of it to be able to position and talk about the policy aspects in a way that that serves the progressive movement instead of sort of accepting and just rolling with the dominant sort of neoliberal framing that has guided both parties for the last like 30 years at least. And so we're sort of figuring out how this is all going to work, and realizing that there are these elements that are really quite perfect and profound, and that I think she meets some aspect of the current zeitgeist that is really serious. And I don't know if you got a chance to look at the website at all.
So can you remind me? I'll look at now.
Yeah, I'll just send the link. But really why I wanted to just open this dialogue is not because I have any, it's not because I have any sort of specific asks of you at this point. I'm mainly trying to reach out to people that I respect and that I trust in search of, you know, whatever kind of advice or recommendations or pointing towards people or towards other groups might come to mind, because I really want to be able to throw the kitchen sink at this opportunity. And I'm new to this, you know, I'm learning as I go, and I'm learning a ton, but it's never enough. So that's sort of the basic context. If you look at the site, the first thing that I would suggest, or you don't have time to look at it now, but there's a section called about meet Kellie in her own words, which is a thing that she wrote, and then I cleaned up a little bit. But I think that will convey a lot of the gravity of sort of who she is and what she represents in a way that you also just can't fake.
Holy moly, this is great.
She works in the youth correction space, and there's a current model for how they conceptualize criminal behavior in youth. People think about it as being maladaptive. Kids have thinking errors. They're broken and incompatible with mainstream society. So they put them into these facilities and they try to intimidate them into being calmer. You know, like that is a thing that they seem to think works. They give them medication, psychotropic medication, to chill them out, put them in restraints, you know, whatever. She has come at this work and realized how horrifically backwards the entire operating conception is. She has seen that the behaviors that get kids locked up, theft, violence, you know, theft and violence are probably some of the main ones, or, you know, if the parents are going to jail or die or whatever, can't provide for the kids, then they end up in orphanages. She has worked in, you know, across the board in those industries. And what she basically started realizing is that all of the behavior patterns that we consider maladaptive or incompatible with mainstream society, those are actually survival tactics that keep them alive. So when she sees a gang kid in her unit who's furious and angry and puffed up and very aggressive, she doesn't shoot him with a shot of horse tranquilizer and handcuff him. She says, "I love your anger. I love your hunger for life. It's why you're here. Don't ever lose that. This is beauty," you know, like really digging into really the core of the person. And she's able to shift people. through that. These kids have never heard that before. They've never felt that kind of love from one of these workers. And for her, it comes from her own background. She grew up in a family with abuse in the home, and she studied criminology to try to figure out, why do people who love each other do harm to the people that they love. So this like goes way back. And so she reached out to the BCI and wanted to get a hold of Dr. Mazio, and he basically forwarded the email to me and said, "Can you handle this?" And so I started talking with her, and I ended up being on the podcast instead of him. She was doing a podcast to try to raise awareness in her field of research that was saying how incredibly backwards their sort of operating framework was. And yeah, she asked me to help manage the campaign. So myself and her daughter, Aislinn, who she's been a single mom to, they're the real deal. So Aislinn and I have been co-managing this thing, and we're trying to put ourselves out of a job. We just want to get to a point where we can actually hire somebody who can take this all the way. And maybe that's us. I really doubt it. I think it's a little bit hubristic to think that we can just sort of figure out how to run a campaign at this level without any experience. So I'm thinking of our role mainly as just trying to get some traction and trying to bring in like an operating budget so that we can actually compete fairly, because this election is against Lauren Boebert. It's Lauren Boebert is the darling of her and Marjorie Taylor Greene are the darling. They're the hope for the future of the Trump crowd. I don't know if you know Boebert very much, but she's the gun lady. She brings guns into the Capitol, and her whole thing is about posturing and bullying and trying to get everybody to shoot each other. And it's this really interesting moment where this election is not a local rural election. It's another one of the Georgia runoffs. This is the next subsequent opportunity to shut the door on authoritarianism in this country. And that's one reason why I feel so strongly about Kellie, is because Boebert represents a worldview. She's not a candidate. It's not Boebert believing in certain policies. She represents a worldview in which people are scared of each other, in which it's the biggest dog wins the fight. It's Thomas Hobbes all the way down. And that is the level of what she represents. Every other person on the Democratic side in this election, they do not represent a worldview. They represent the sort of middle of the road, milquetoast progressives. One is a state representative, one is a local official. They don't talk about values. They don't represent the fundamental element of progressive democracy, which is empathy and protection and empowerment of each other. And so I feel very strongly that that we need to throw the kitchen sink at this, because it's very likely that the DCCC, the major kingmakers of the Democratic mainstream, are going to pick the state senator or the other one, because they've already raked in several $100,000, and all that the DCCC cares about is fundraising. The problem is that if they win the primary, either they're going to lose against Boebert because they don't represent a worldview, or they're going to win against Boebert and they're not going to be able to address the underlying conditions that gave rise to Boebert being elected in the first place, which is that people are unsafe. They don't feel a sense of agency. They don't have predictable survival resources, and there is no community anymore in these places. So yeah, I think this is really important. And I am asking for advice and help, and I don't know where it will come from necessarily, but I know that that the more people that I ask and the more people that I sort of open the door to and say, not only do I need help for my work and for the campaign, but if we're doing this seriously, this isn't something that we'll be taking. This is an invitation to be a part of what we hope will be able to grow into something of a movement. And everybody that helps out or participates, I tell them, we have in front of us a once in a lifetime candidate who represents the exact elements that progressive democracy is based on. All that we don't have are the resources and the infrastructure to propel her to a campaign at the level that the National Party can propel. If we can somehow rally to this moment, we ourselves have the opportunity to put this person into office and to have this, her whole policy is about reconnecting humans to nature, because that's where safety comes from, right? So garden parks, urban gardens, that is a key element of what she wants to do. It is hard to overstate the opportunity that's in front of us, and the minimal amount of actual risk that there is to any of us. But there's a huge amount of risk to the people in this district and to the progressive movement. And I really, I appreciate you for being just open to talk about this. And I hope that gives a little bit more sense of background. And did I tell you about our study about masks last summer, where we got anti-maskers to wear masks because we framed mask wearing in terms of values that they believed instead of values that already mask wearing people believed?
Whoa, that
is
beautiful.
Duh, but yeah, we ran this study last summer where we surveyed several hundred Trump voters who were very opposed to masks as a thing. And we assessed what values they held, what values they identified with. And they identified with freedom and loyalty, and they did not identify with science, right? And so there's this phenomenon called the backfire effect, where if you present somebody with information that runs counter to their beliefs, then they just don't even take it in. They just shut down, double down on the belief. And so we were hypothesizing that people who weren't wearing masks were just backfiring to the CDC guidelines, because the CDC guidelines were all arguments from authority about science. Talking about the Harvard people, the best scientists, and that works for people who believe that scientists are trustworthy and believe in science, but not for others. Anyway, we found that when we cut together a very short little video about masks that basically said, our communities are at stake, the veterans are the most at risk, we have an obligation to protect these people who have given so much to the country. And so that was the loyalty one. Then we did a freedom one, and then we did a science framing one, and then we did a neutral one. And we're finishing up the paper now, but we got a statistically significant change in anti-mask sentiment and in behavior a week later through loyalty framing. And so I've been telling people that if the progressives, we know what policies we need to implement. It is known what needs to be done. People need to be protected. They need to be empowered. They need resources. These are easy things to know. But the question is, how do we pass those laws? How do we get these policies implemented? And the left has been pathetic at messaging. They've been pathetic at making a case for why what needs to happen is the path forward. But the other part of it is, so this guy, George Lakoff, is a cognitive linguist that I tell everybody about. He thinks that a big part of it is that Republicans went to business school. And so they learned that they had to hook into emotion. Most of the Democrats went to study the humanities. And so they learned that you have to make carefully reasoned arguments. And nobody has ever been convinced. Well, a lot of intellectuals are convinced by reasoned arguments, but the voting public, especially in rural parts of the country, if you don't hook into their values, if you don't talk about what it is that you believe, that they also believe, then good luck with your charts and your graphs. So I've been telling people who've been asking about what our strategy is as a campaign for actually getting some of this stuff passed, and for making a compelling case for ourselves. And I've been just saying it's storytelling. It's storytelling of the perspectives of the least powerful in terms of the values held by the more powerful. That's how you open the door for outgroup empathy and for real understanding of why these issues are so important and why, you know, we need to take better care of these folks. So all this to say that the local voices is like, if you were to take that sort of theoretical abstract idea and take it into a, you know, a program that puts it into practice, I'm pretty sure you would come up with local voices.
Yeah. Interesting.
Which is a crazy synergy. And I just need to acknowledge that, because I didn't know this existed. I didn't know, but it checks out. I mean, you're so on the money. It's kind of eerie.
Yeah, I mean, I really owe the credit of the design to Lee, but when I heard it, I felt it, and we just jumped on it, you know, with no money, and then the money came.
There's so much distrust right now, and rightfully so. The only way that I can see to actually convey that somebody is actually trying to do the right thing is to have other people who have no reason to lie about it say it. Because nobody's trusted if they say themselves, I'm a good person, I'm going to do the right thing. If you're seeking public office, you're going to be distrusted off the bat. So there's two ways of saying it. One way of saying it is she says that when she has been called into communities, the reason that she's been called into communities are that policies failed. When policies failed and she was called into the communities, what she saw was that the only way that the communities were staying afloat was because individual people were supporting each other, going out of their way to look after kids, to share milk, to offer a safe place, to, you know, little things that no policy is even that granular, because the policies are blunt force instruments. She believes in her bones that the only reason America is still afloat is because in communities, in the vulnerable communities, individuals look out for each other. And that's where the idea of fierce empathy comes from. It's that sort of, I don't care if I'm putting myself at risk. This human in my community needs help. I have an extra jug of milk. I'm probably going to need some more food myself, but right now this person is in need. And that is the attitude that drives her, and it's that's what she wants to have people experience from their representative. That it's not her saying, this is what you need, you should be fine if we give you this. It's asking, it's identifying actual physiological homeostatic needs that people have and flooding them with those resources so that they go from the experience of scarcity and vulnerability to an undeniable experience of abundance. And whether it's pencils, you know, in some of these schools, or textbooks, or tampons, or, you know, gloves for you know, migrant workers. The idea is that when people are in scarcity, they default to violence and anger. And if you can really find out what it is that they need to feel safe, then you can take violence and anger off the table. And you can create the conditions for cooperation and for problem solving and for community building. So that's one way of saying sort of what she's about, is that she has seen this fierce empathy among vulnerable community members and knows that that is missing in the relationship of the people to their congressional representative. She tells this one story of working with kids in these homes, orphanages, correction facilities, and when you put out food and have them come for lunch, there's always one kid who steals, like takes the food off one plate and then sits, like puts it in their pocket and then sits down at another plate. And so the conventional way of dealing with that is you punish them, right? You because you obviously see it, you know who it is, like they're not that sneaky. But what she does is she makes that kid her snack helper, and she takes them into the storage closet, and she stuffs their pockets with snacks until they're like, in shock and can't take anymore. And then she said, over a few weeks, you do this for a few weeks, you stuff food in their mouth, you stuff it into their hands, you stuff it into their pockets, they can't hold anymore, possibly if they tried. After a few weeks, they say, I don't need to be your helper anymore. Like they've shifted in the perception of what these food resources mean. So, and the reason I say that is that that's something that you can do as a government representative. You can create funnels to provide basic survival resources. And that's really the basic element of her work, is that violence and aggression comes from a physiological state of scarcity. And so it's very simple what needs to be done. We need to meet the physiological needs of people. And the physiological needs are for predictable survival resources, such as food, safety, shelter, relationships, and self-agency. Those 5 components are the basics of what she what she would like to implement as policy support for all communities. And that's really the plan, is that it's create the conditions for your physiology to enable you to be open and vulnerable and hopeful and creative, and not default into violence and fear and anger, which nobody wants. But they're forced into it if they don't have food, if they don't have predictable survival. She's run these trainings for years where she goes into these communities and basically tries to teach people this stuff because it's important. And these community members, as soon as she says, your kids don't have thinking errors, they're adapted to an environment of scarcity, they stand up and bang on the table and shout in appreciation, because they've never heard anybody give an explanation for this kind of behavior that doesn't paint their kids and their populations as being basically subhuman, incapable of regulation, whatever. So it resonates. It really resonates. She has a strong base of loyal supporters that are workers in the industry. There are 2 main avenues going forward that I think would be really helpful to sort of hear your thoughts on and talk about. One is this video making. One of the things that she lacks is political name recognition. Nobody knows who she is, and she doesn't have she doesn't have that background in politics, which is both good and bad. The voters actually don't want established politicians. They say that they want people like her. One of the main ways that fundraising happens, and I've basically done a crash course on campaign finance the last few weeks. However, there's a process called bundling, by which individuals who are adjacent to the campaign go out into their own friend groups and raise money from their own networks, and then offer a bundled donation to the campaign. So in other words, the campaign doesn't have to then reach out to all of these people to whom the adjacent person has a personal relationship. The campaign adjacent person goes out into their peer group and says, hey, anybody who I'm doing this thing, if any of you can kick in a certain amount, I will be able to provide it to the campaign as a bundle. And that might seem like not a very good deal for the bundler, but there is a compensation, and the compensation is that key bundlers get access. That's the sort of give and take is, and it can be problematic in the case where corporations are involved. We don't have any corporations involved, but the exchange is that somebody who's bringing in bundles of donations from individuals that the campaign isn't directly reaching, that individual isn't just funneling money to the campaign. That individual is creating a revenue stream, and in exchange, that individual and the people that they are gathering the funds for have access to the campaign and to the candidate, and are able to talk about plans and to offer suggestions and make sure that things are going in a direction that feels right. So I don't know if you would, I don't want to assume that you would personally be interested in that kind of a role. You've got a ton on your plate, and I don't want to put you in that position. But if there are people that you know who may be in a similar field or have some experience with fundraising or are just well connected, the way that campaigns get their large amounts of money is through people who know lots of people who have the means to donate. I'm like in full sort of vulnerability, just reaching out humbly, asking to see who might be interested in supporting this, because at the end of the day, we don't need to rake in huge amounts of money, because we're probably not going to run a major TV campaign. But if we want to be competitive, we need to have operations covered. We need to be able to, have polls being done. We need to be able to buy the voter data from the DNC. There's all these things that are just operating expenses that we won't really be able to mobilize a competitive effort without.